Lynn C. Cole earned her bachelor's degree in elementary education and social sciences from the University of Maryland in 1970. Dr. Cole served as a classroom teacher, reading specialist, and gifted and talented specialist in public education for over 15 years. From 1989 until 2011, she served as a faculty member in the Department of Elementary Education at Towson University. These are her reflections.
Dr. Cole, thank you for sharing with us your thoughts about your own teacher preparation and your subsequent career in education. This will add greatly to our understanding of teacher education at Towson University. I think where we should begin probably is in the beginning. So if you would you share with us your early social context, where you grew up, what kinds of career thoughts you were having when you got to high school, and what made you consider teaching?
Yes, I had a very unconventional early childhood. I was born to a 17-year-old mother. My father was in prison at the time. This mother was illiterate. My father got out of prison. We moved deep into the reservation, and he became employed for El Paso Natural Gas Company, which is, at that time, ran across the reservation.
And this was in Arizona?
Arizona and New Mexico. Huh? So I grew up in Arizona and New Mexico on the reservation. Huh. And my earliest memory of school was one room with 12 rows, and Bonnie sat in front of me, who was Navajo, and spoke little to no English, but we would play outside under piñon trees. Lived in a hogan. I lived in company housing. And 12 rows over was a young man named Cecil Etcity. And he was the only young person in that row of seats. But it always, as I look back on it, I think, why did they have 12 rows? And it was a very unusual school setting, as I'm used to now, but that's all I knew. Mr. Oliphant was our teacher, and he spoke in English, whether the children could understand him or not. Fortunately, I could. I was very blessed to have at home a telescope, and my earliest memory is finally getting it at probably 3 years old, how the moon was not broken, that the light was shining on it in a different way, and that's profound in my memory of just understanding that concept. I was also fortunate enough to have a set of encyclopedias to read, because we were 40 miles from the nearest trading post. So, I mean, we were literally very, very isolated. But this encyclopedia set I could start reading. And M was for Magellan, and I remember being most fascinated about geography and Magellan. 40 miles away at this trading post was a mission where there was a woman who had a piano in the mission. And so somehow I got to go there for piano lessons. And that was probably 4 years old. I remember probably the first month or two, and these were like weekly trips, I was kind of in a fog. And one day, I think about a month or two into it, but that's a long memory, so it could be less than that. All of a sudden it was like a black curtain that pulled, and I knew it. And I played piano forever, just loved it, and became actually more advanced than she was. So that ended it, and I didn't get to play piano after that. But those are my earliest memories of learning. And somehow learning became very important to me, and the idea of learning. And I'm blessed, I think, to be able to reach back and have a firm memory that young in my life of learning. My father, as I grew up, our mother we were separated from my mother, 4 of us, when I was 12. So my father was the primary parent. And somewhere along the line, he said, as you asked me, how did I become career-oriented? He, I'm sure, recognized that I was getting a substandard education and that I probably wouldn't live the rest of my life on the reservation. And I think it was just the times too. This was the early 60s when I was in high school, and he said, you should think about being a nurse or a secretary or a teacher. So the nurse I did wasn't too cool. I went over to the tech part of the high school where I was and learned how to type very fast. But the other opportunity I got was being able to help with the elementary school that was attached to our high school, because there weren't many children, so we were all in kind of one building. And I had moved then closer to Gallup, New Mexico, a place where when I was in my early years was 8 hours away. That's where we went once a month for groceries. But now it was like within 30 minutes to 45 minutes away. So I was a little closer to civilization. And I worked with those boys and girls who were primarily Navajo, who had been taken out of their hogans and forced to get on a bus to go to school. And the way they taught them English was by literally slapping their knuckles with a ruler anytime they spoke Navajo. And even then, enlightened as I was, that seemed very cruel and unusual. And a little side note to you, the sons and daughters of code talkers were my classmates, the World War II code talkers. They were extremely influential in us winning World War II in the South Pacific. So had that Navajo language not been preserved in some way, that would have impacted you and I very, very much in the rest of our country. But it gave me a keen interest in language and how language held who we are. And I developed a fairly sophisticated vocabulary and find myself even today being careful to kind of downplay the words I use to fit in with our undergrads. And some friends or associates I have that aren't university professors, because I've been in a pretty elite group all of my professional life. So words mean a lot to me, our language means a lot to me, and other people's language mean a lot to me. But it was just by eliminating the other two choices that I became a teacher. My father married a public health service nurse when I was 16. She was young and inherited 4 children, and that was not a wonderful situation. So as soon as I could, I left Fort Defiance, where we were living there, and went to Arizona State University for the summer and worked for my tuition and made 2 A's and 2 B's. And I thought, wow, maybe I could go to a university setting, because we were all very unsure about that. But that was a good experience, and educational philosophy was one of my first courses, and I loved it, and knew that I could be a teacher and wanted to be a teacher at a very deep level.
And so that was, where is your bachelor's degree from?
I stayed there for 1 summer, and then I had to go to a college, a small college, which was the only place I was allowed to apply for the regular academic year in the Yuma Desert. But in that year, my father was transferred to Washington, D.C. At the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Because he was now employed by them, not the El Paso Natural Gas Company, which didn't really matter. It still kept us on the reservation. But I couldn't support myself and my tuition and pay out of state. So I went to College Park and talk about a culture shock. That was an amazing culture shock, because I graduated from high school in 1966, and we were so isolated that I really didn't realize the civil rights movement was going on. I knew Vietnam was going on, but didn't have a firm grip on what that was doing to the rest of the world. I just knew we were losing a lot of classmates. So in College Park in my first year, I believe, or second year, there were riots. We took over the administration building. I mean, just all kinds of things. And I saw Washington, D.C. on fire and realized the Watts riots had occurred also. And just spent a lot of time catching up on mainstream America. Had never seen a Beatles movie until I got into a graduate course in media. So just, I guess all of my adult life has been kind of catching up on what I would have had in mainstream, at least white America, because that was a disconnect too. I hold a lot of the probably belief systems and certainly social norms of the Navajo, because that's who I grew up with. And I wasn't influenced very much at home. We kind of raised ourselves. I was the oldest of four of us, so we were kind of absence of that traditional influence of nursery rhymes, those kinds of things didn't exist in my background. So my passion for children's lit came from that. It's been a good way to acculturate myself to mainstream America.
Hopefully you also were able to hold on to some of your Navajo background.
Can't shake it. Don't want to. I feel like I was very blessed, not disadvantaged by that experience. Quite unusual to be white and be able to grow up in a place where you're the minority. A bit unusual because everyone knew I wouldn't live there all my life. But I was never rejected. I was always accepted. And I have a great reverence for Native Americans. I was treated very well.
So at College Park, you majored in elementary ed.
Yes, I did.
And do you remember anything about your coursework to become a teacher? Was it mostly theoretical, or practical? Did you have any hands-on experience? Did you get to go observe children or interact with them before you actually did that student teaching piece?
Yes, all of that. When I think back on it, it was very much like in structure, our schooling here at Towson University. I had methods courses, some observation experiences. We were not well prepared for being put in Washington, D.C. schools for student teaching, where's where I was put. But again, a very useful experience. We were, I guess I was in a cohort. I probably didn't think of it at that time as a cohort. But we went into Washington, D.C. in one of the poorest areas. And I don't recall being very independent there. We probably did more observation than not. And then our next rotation was in the part of Washington, D.C. where the Redskins lived, and there were white maids and butlers. So it was a very different experience there. And I was able to function a little more there. But I probably left there not feeling very prepared for teaching. I'm not sure any of us do. I think if we asked our own students, they probably would say the same thing. But I didn't end up teaching in a situation like either of those.
Interesting.
I taught. I went into a school very close to the campus of College Park.
Was this for student teaching, or is this
no?
after
When
you
I
had graduated?
when I was hired.
So your student teaching experiences were
was
in
Washington, D.C. Yeah, and I went into a very small school setting for my first year in teaching, with the tracks literally running down the middle of the neighborhood, blacks on one side and white children on the other side. Berwyn Heights area, Edmondson, a very old school, small school, but having a very successful first 2 or 3 years. So they must have done a good job. And I think teaching was much more simple then. I needed to teach children. Paperwork was not the huge issue that it is now. I remember my children being bused. Some of the children, after my, I guess 1 or 2 years in that school, I went in as faculty opening a school in Paint Branch, not Montgomery County, but Paint Branch Elementary in Prince George's County, that was more in a white neighborhood. And we had children being bused for 45 minutes before they got to my classroom from around the county. So we were then into busing for desegregation. But I never had difficulty teaching. I was a good teacher. Remembered always, having visitors and feeling very confident about my ability to teach. But the job was very different than what we're teaching our teachers for now. It's become much more complicated.
Indeed. Very quickly after you completed your degree, you decided to go on and get a master's degree in reading. What led you to choose reading?
Reading to me was not just reading. Coursework in reading is coursework in how the brain is comprehending information and thinking. So to me, it's never been about reading. It's been about learning. And to this day, I think that is the case, that we use reading as the end product that we're looking at. But reading is one of the things that gives us insight into how children process information, code break, are able to make it a part of them and come out with something different. So reading fascinated me. College Park was very big at that point. We were one of the centers for reading. Bob Wilson, there were incredibly bright and capable professors there, and I had the insight to realize that, so I just stayed there. And I had always gone right through school. I graduated a semester early, even with a couple of transfers, so I never really didn't go to school. I worked and went to school through summers and everything. So I just continued. I was probably a little afraid to ever stop, but I really always wanted to know more and more and more. So I got my master's in reading and went on to get my doctorate in reading because it was just a fine place to be. And in that doctorate is where I branched off a little into gifted education.
And you changed your career a bit, just did a little move to becoming a reading specialist.
I did. As soon as I got my master's, I was a reading specialist in Howard County. I left Prince George's County and went to Howard County.
And what kinds of things did you do in that position?
As an elementary reading specialist, I had a caseload of children who had very clinical needs for reading improvement. It was diagnostic and remediation in nature. Loved it. And at the end of the second year, got a bit bored and wondered what would happen if I did something like this in a middle school. Very different role. There I was teaching 6 classes a day. So I didn't have it wasn't a good fit for me. I got called fart face the first day of school. It didn't go well. But it was a good experience for me. And I missed the technical nature of what I was able to do with children as a reading specialist. But in that year, I became more and more involved in gifted children, was recruited by parents to be a part of a program they were trying to start for children who were gifted and had great needs. So there was a real paradigm shift from a deficit model in my mind to trying to accommodate children that were still very much at a disadvantage, but not because they had difficulty learning, but because they knew too much for the school system. So there was a great departure there for me. But I used the same information that I
So
knew.
you actually did work with gifted and talented programs. It seems as though you almost generated those or created those, or at least were on the ground floor when that began.
Absolutely. There was nothing in our schools to accommodate gifted children at that time. It was a Saturday program that I was asked to run, or to create and run. And it was all triggered by my experiences as an elementary reading specialist. One of the kindergarten teachers slipped off and whispered to me, "I've got this kid that can read. He's just turned 5, and I don't know what to do with him. Will you help me?" And so I did. And that little boy opened my eyes to a whole group of children who were probably hiding in our classrooms and simply bored and going along with it. But this child acted out, so we knew about him. And I would work with him every day. We would read, and the challenge was finding really interesting information that he could read that was developmentally appropriate. But I started thinking more and more about that population of children, and realized along the way at some point that I was kind of misplaced in school. I remember in several transfers in my own schooling where I was simply put in the back of a room, and here's a book about Ralph Bunche, read it. But I didn't have the curriculum structure that allowed me to progress with skills that I knew, because I was simply, I think people, if you can read well, that was kind of the demarcation for, we don't know what to do with you, just go continue to read, which is a dangerous thing to do. It leaves great holes in children's array of knowledge and the skills that they have. And so I became very sympathetic to children who were gifted and started adding courses to my doctoral program through special education at College Park in gifted. And there were only 2 or 3 courses, but I took those. I did some independent studies with people that I could, ask, who were on the ground floor of breaking into that field. And somewhere within the first 3 years of my teaching, there was a position open at the State Department of Education, Project Basic. Dave Hornbeck was the superintendent of schools then, way back then. And Maryland had gotten a grant, a $10,000 grant. We were one of 3 states in the country. And I was a part of that grant. And we worked in 3 school systems across the state doing pilot projects for gifted children. I stayed there for 10 years and we did an awful lot. We really fleshed out gifted programs, added our state summer centers. I slowly became in charge of our giving in-service training and driving to school systems to give them help actually developing credible gifted programs. Working with superintendents, which were the slow group. That was because it was still very unfamiliar and it was very risky. Our citizenry wants children, unless they have one of these children, all of our children to be able to perform at a basic level. And we've always had that kind of model at our state level of let's bring up the bottom. But we haven't put that same effort on what happens to the children that are already at the top. They have a right to learn something new every day. They have every right that every child has. So what do we do for them? And we still have that quandary, but we've broken a lot of barriers in today's world. But I spent 10 years there and never got state legislation to mandate gifted programs. We're still enabling legislation in Maryland and decided that I needed to move on and try something else.
Right. So while you were there, or even today, is there any special certification or anything like that for gifted and talented in the state?
In the last 3 to 5 years, we have been able to get that. And I have taught some of those classes for our in-service teachers. We've got cohorts in Baltimore County that I've taught, Montgomery County, Anne Arundel County, Prince George's. And yes, those teachers will now have a certification for gifted ed.
And is that a K-12
No,
cert?
No, it's not. It's at their original certification.
I see. Okay, interesting. So as you said, you stayed at MSDE for a decade, and that leaves us at about 1989 or so?
Yes, it is. No, 1986. I was there from 1976 to 86.
And what happens next?
I was asked to come to Carroll County as a supervisor of gifted. They had lost their supervisor, and the counties knew me because I was the one holding state conferences and all of that. Yes. And I thought, let's see what I can do at a local level. So I did that. I did that for 3 years. Became disgruntled because I could not persuade them to really do it in a credible way. It was an IQ test, and it was the top 3 to 5%. And that simply eliminated the children who were very bright but weren't going to show that to you on an IQ test. And Carroll County is still a bit of a different county. They're fairly isolated. They have a very homogeneous population for the most part. And at that time, we didn't have progressive Board of Ed members, and it was just, they could have done what they were doing without me. So I decided to try to make another change. And my secretary at the time saw this flyer that went out to probably all of the school systems by Irene Hansen.
Interesting.
Yeah, and she was retiring, and it was be the director of college for kids. I had no idea what that was, but I knew that I had done programs like that through Howard Community College with a fledgling parent group, and I was intrigued by that. I had my own children were, I think, 3 and 5 years old at that time, and maybe time to fire the full-time nanny and do something part-time. But what happened when I applied for it is that I was recruited to be full-time here. I had a PhD, and Towson was in need of professors, so I put the nanny back in place.
Especially in that field.
Yeah.
There probably wasn't anybody or few members of the faculty.
And they didn't want me for my expertise in gifted education, oddly enough. That I've never been used here in a fundamental way for my expertise in gifted education. It was the thing that got me here, and then I taught methods courses in language arts, social studies, foundations, anything else, because we have a gaping hole in our country in that we do not give our undergrad pre-service teachers any information about gifted children who we know are going to be in their classrooms. So that would still be a goal of mine.
Well,
to try to influence
tell us a little bit about College for Kids. What was that program, and what was the intent, the design?
Well, it's not past tense. Fortunately, just in the last day or two, we've been able to move that program over to the Fisher School for Math and Science. So it'll be housed over there, probably in conjunction with the Hackerman Academy, which has programs that promote attendance of children that would be very similar to the ones that gravitate to College for Kids. But College for Kids was just a program I did on the side. I used to do it in the Saturdays of February in the winter. I think my 50th birthday gift to me was to stop doing that because it was a tremendous overload. Bringing children on campus for any amount of time is a huge requirement, and it was never funded. It was always self-supporting and operating on a shoestring, as it is today. But what we do for a week in the summer is help children realize they're not alone. They look forward to it for a whole year. When they get to the campus, they are in coursework that we try to create that would be of interest to any child, but it's deeper. The information we're giving is deeper and more creative outlets for it. And the humorous thing about it is the first time we come out with the courses that we're going to have for the summer and the little blurb about it, we know those children have probably investigated it more than the teachers could ever do. So our challenge is to continue to challenge them when we get them, because they already know how many times a hummingbird beats its wings and all of that.
So what kinds of
courses? We have primarily leaned into science involving animals or natural phenomena. And my partner, Gail Gasbridge, who's now the Associate Dean over there, has been wonderful in giving me access to labs and some of her students that are there for science education. But our coursework is primarily in science. We didn't intend that to be the case, but young children, we start with 4-year-olds, which is very unique for the program. You can teach them anything if you include animals. So that's primarily what we do. We design courses around science topics that we think all children would be interested in, but these children, we can go deeper and broader and make many connections with them.
So it would seem then, given that curriculum emphasis, that a move to the Fisher College it's
a very good fit.
It is a good fit.
It is a very good fit. They will be able to advertise for us along with all their other programs that they offer children. And it's the mission of the College for Kids is to provide children with age-appropriate activities that honor the kind of information they know and allow them to use it. I mean, that's not the mission if you read it off the website, and I would probably not be able to recite that to you, but it is to give children enriched experiences that allow them to use knowledge, because they're very knowledge-oriented. They know things and they want to use that knowledge, and they want people to know they know that. So to just give them something creative is not what it's about, but to give them ways to express what they've learned in addition to what they came to us knowing is the creative part of it. But it's very hands-on and very developmentally appropriate.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's still continuing.
It's still continuing. I had a dear, dear undergraduate student who stayed with me, got her master's degree in reading, continued to check in on me, realized it was a very labor-intensive job, would volunteer for me anytime she could. Slowly but surely, we got a viable enough population that I could pay her something to help me 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the program opened. Then we got Liz Scarborough, who's here in the library, academic achievement program, put her son in it and realized, oh my gosh, you need my technical services. So she got us computerized and volunteered for us, which allowed us to ground our population even more. And the upshot is that they are the director and assistant director and have been for 2 years. So I was able to hand that off.
Yes.
And it survived, but only because of great allegiance to my two angels that just were committed to me personally and to the program and gave me what I needed to keep going when I thought I couldn't do it anymore. So it's been very gratifying.
It should be.
It's a program that I hope
deserved.
can expand. Our parent population plan their vacation around it, literally. We have people that travel from the Eastern Shore, from Virginia,
Really?
from Delaware, grandmothers that have their grandchildren with them, and it's scheduled to be in the College for Kids week. It's a revered program. We have about a high 60 to 70% return of those same children from the time they're 4 on.
And what
Very
ages
unique.
does the program cover?
4 years old through entering 6th grade. We find at 6th grade there's a lot more opportunities that open up for the children.
Sure.
And just because we don't have a very firm financial base, we have to know that we can fill the classes. So at 6th grade we lose our children to a lot of other fine things. So we stop at that point.
You were saying, in addition, this was really almost an additional piece of your career here at Towson.
It was. It was my service component.
It certainly was a great service. As a member of the elementary education department, you were very much involved in various aspects of curriculum and taught a variety of courses. You also lived through several NCATE visits, so you have a sense of what accreditation is looking for in terms of teacher education programs. Would you tell us a little bit about your experience in the department? And this is really leading to a larger question of what do you think are the essential components in an effective teacher education program?
That's a huge question,
It certainly
and the
is.
one that I'm going to probably fumble with the most.
Well, tell us a little bit then about courses that you taught, and did you supervise student teachers ever? Were you in a PDS setting?
Well, let me start there.
Okay.
Bess Altworker and I started the first PDS in Maryland in 1992. Our dean, Dean Hinkle, caught us in the hallway and he said, both of you, I think what he wanted to say, were a little rogue. You experiment a lot with things. I want you to think about what a PDS is and do one for me. We didn't have any idea what a PDS was. Professional Development School was a totally new concept. We read all the information he had. He said, I have a school for you, Owings Mills Elementary. And literally, Bess and I felt like we were married for 2 years. We went to that school. We had a cohort of students that we were really flying solo. I think we were one of the few in the country. And it was the year that we won the award for PDS. So Bess and I feel very good about that.
You should.
But it was very experimental. We ended up teaching them like we would want them to teach in a classroom. So I taught the social studies methods in the group. We both taught reading, and we taught them like we would children. They came through in groups. We grouped them by skill and interest. So all of their coursework took place in an elementary classroom at Owings Mills Elementary School. We had a lot of visitors, and it became apparent at the end of those 2 years that was probably not a model that we could sustain, because a lot of people might not have the versatility that Bess and I had between the two of us, because I went into that experience having taught foundations of education, social studies methods, our language arts methods, almost anything. And Bess was very much grounded in reading and was teaching graduate courses, in fact, in that. So between the two of us, it worked, and we were great buddies, so that made it work. But it wasn't something you could depend on working. So as it grew, the model changed to a more practical one. Ours was great. I think the students that went through it benefited greatly from it. But the model changed. But we felt we were doing something very important to kick that off.
Absolutely.
To answer your question about the broader needs in a teacher ed program, I think the balance is always giving them practical training, but deep education. And I think a flaw in any teacher preparation program is training them to do the job. And many times we're tempted to train them to know and be able to do the job of teaching in the surrounding school systems they're going to be hired in. And we know that those school systems. What we can't ever stop doing is teaching them how to think about learning and educating children at a more fundamental, basic theoretical level. So we always have to balance the theory with the practical aspects. And I think sometimes we stray into the practical aspects of trying to make sure they're ready. But being ready is also living through the different swings of the different things that our population is trying, that our citizenry wants, that get dictated by, different presidents and NEA and all of those things. So we need teachers that can also be a bit rebel and say, when I look at this new paradigm, these are my concerns, and think about it from a very fundamental theoretical basis, but also be able to apply the best of that into a particular program and the procedures of that program. Because none of our programs are going to fit the needs of all children. And if you know how to tweak that program or those techniques, you'll be able to meet the needs of our children, at least better than if you simply had a rote program. And I think many times we have fallen into dummy-proofing our schooling, and we lose our finest teachers. The teachers who come to us because they love learning and want to meet the needs of all children are very handicapped by that approach. So we as an education, as a system of educating our educators, we can't be swayed by those trends. And yet we have to prepare our teachers to move into those school systems, to work within the school systems to promote change. So it's a real balance. And I think we've got to keep that at the forefront of our methods programs, or courses.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered that. But it's very hard, because if you look at anyone, if you ask that question at any one time, the job of actually teaching is very much influenced by politics, by what our researchers in education are telling us at the time, by our population shifts, our cultural shifts, all kinds of things. So good teachers have to ride through a lot of that and know what is temporary and can be changed and altered, and our school systems have to give them that freedom to do that. But I don't know that we've hit that mark very well.
Lynn, is there anything that you wanted to tell us about in terms of your professional life, career to date, that we've missed?
No, I don't think so. I have loved my tenure at Towson. I've been at Towson from 1989 till 2010. And that's the longest I ever stayed at any one place, which means I was growing and thriving. I've always cherished the colleagues that I've had. I've found them to be bright people, very little dead wood, people who were really rolling in and doing a yeoman's job at designing coursework and preparing our teachers. I will miss that part of it tremendously.
But you haven't left entirely.
I have not left, no. As long as they offer me children's literature, I will always come and teach. To me, that's an incredible course. I get very offended when someone refers to it as kitty lit. Mm-hmm. I make it a very rigorous course, mm-hmm. as I think my students would tell you. I think I'm somber about the future of teacher education as I'm on my way out in some respects. I think that with as much history as I've had teaching, I can kind of look back and tell you what our students coming in have and don't have. Mm-hmm. And I fear that our students are coming to us less prepared in real basic skills, writing, thinking. As I look at the core curriculum, which is very controversial here among our College of Education, I happen to love it. I think it is well overdue because I see it as a framework that will allow our brightest children to finally think critically and be able to show what they do best, which all children need. And I think that it is very telling that when I try to use our core curriculum in my assignments, mm-hmm. because I do that routinely, take this book and what you know about it and find where it's applicable to the core curriculum, and how would you use that book to prove to your principal or supervisor that you could assess children on the core curriculum by using this book. I mean, the next assignment coming up, our final assignment, is reading Charlotte's Web, which has a lot of meat to it, and you can find ways in our core curriculum, I've staged it at third grade, to have children be able to demonstrate real critical thinking. Mm-hmm. The problem is that our undergrads are not good at that. They don't think as well as I would hope they could think, and they write at a level that is astoundingly poor. So they're not coming to us college ready, uh-huh. and we're going to have to do a lot to supplement their education to get them to be able to hit the ground running. And our core curriculum is in place in 2013. So I keep reminding them, yes, if you, in my rubric, it will say whether you were critically thinking about this and were you able to write, as I would hope a pre-service teacher could, ready to teach children in first grade through sixth grade. And I find that that's really lacking for them. And I think it's very hard to catch up that fast. And it makes me wonder what's happening downstream that causes that. Because I think in the past I got students who were better able to think their way through a question or an assignment I gave them that was clearly analytical and interpretive and very high level thinking. And now they're baffled by it, and I have to, there's a lot of questioning and a lot of show me another model of it. I don't think they've had that experience themselves. So I am an advocate of our core curriculum mm-hmm. effort. Mm-hmm. And I hope it's not a whim. I hope we finally start really assessing how well our children are being taught all the way through, and that we embrace that at a university level.
One last question.
Yes.
What would you say to individuals who are considering teaching as a profession? What wisdom, what advice would you give them?
Don't assume you want to be a teacher because you were always at the chalkboard in your basement when you were 6 years old. Because the job of teaching has changed tremendously since I was a teacher. And it will continue to change. Really assess your disposition for teaching, because I think that's what makes or breaks teachers more than anything. And a lot of our pre-service teachers want to be teachers because they were good in school skills, mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily translate to being able to teach children who don't learn easily. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're more handicapped. If it was very natural for you, you're going to have to figure out how to bridge those barriers and really show children in a multitude of ways how to learn. And our children, in many respects, are coming to us with less and less engagement at home for all kinds of reasons. So our schools are our homes. They're our children's second homes, sometimes our first homes. So I would want them to be aware of all the demands on a teacher, the paperwork, the criticism that our public heaps on it. If I were president of our country, I would have every citizen spend not only do their jury duty, but spend a week every year in a school that's not in their neighborhood. Just observing. Don't have to lift a finger, but observe. I think our citizenry is very out of touch with what our school classrooms are about, and where the bulk of our children, where they are in their own development. But I would tell them to make sure they have volunteered a lot in schools, and not the school you went to, because you're not probably going to teach the children like you. You're going to teach a very diverse population, I would hope, and to be able to embrace that, not tolerate that diversity, but celebrate it, and really and immerse yourself in things that are not like you, beliefs, places. Become worldly. But I think a lot of our teachers think they want to be teachers because it's fun. I love children, and it takes a lot more than loving children. It takes the skill of being able to take concepts, complex concepts, and make them clear for children whose intellectual development is maybe not there, and you have to do a lot of scaffolding. To be able to understand their emotional development and be nurturing. It's just a big, big job.
It is.
I think we ought to get them in classrooms immediately, early on, so we're not at a student teaching level at the end of 4 years and staring across the table at a parent who says, how did my child make it this far? How did my adult child, make A's and is now failing student teaching? I find myself being considered the rigorous instructor. I do achieve a somewhat of a bell curve in my class, even though they're already screened in. And I would want my colleagues to really be very critical of their work and let them know where they have holes, and then be willing to help them develop that. But we do them no favor to pass them through without great rigor. So I remember having big holes in my education and working very hard at being up to par. And I cherish that. It made me work hard, and it made me realize that I did not know it all. It humbled me, and I think we do an injustice to our pre-service teachers to do anything other than that. And I don't know that we do that enough. Our tenure situation and our promotion situation relying on evaluations, it's very difficult to have students who have had a really rough time getting through your course and sending you emails and saying to you, I worked very hard on this and I don't know why I don't deserve an A. And having to respond back that, it's not the amount of time you worked on it that I could ever assess. It's the product that you gave me, and it's fair, and let's talk about it more. But that's hard to do, and some students will walk away with a very angry attitude about that. And when you're the only one doing that, or one of the few doing that, it gives very mixed signals to our students, and it's very hard on the teachers who are trying to hold a real high standard for us.
Absolutely.
I have 2 granddaughters, and my 5-year-old granddaughter just entered preschool, and our son-in-law was the one that took her for her screening for preschool. And he came back shocked at what preschoolers need to know about school, to be screened in and be school ready. And I often think of them when I think of the students that I'm teaching. What I want this person to be Adelaide's teacher. And I think we all have to come at it with that degree of concern. And a lot of good young people should not be teachers, and a lot should. And it can be based on disposition as well as their skill at manipulating instruction.
Absolutely.
And unless we really give them opportunity to test that, they won't know until it's too late. And I would like to see them determine that earlier on in their college career here than at the very end.
Is it a career that people should be pursuing?
Oh, yes. I mean, teaching?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Our finest and best should be. Absolutely. But you can't go in it without having nerves of steel. You have to be very committed to the public relations aspect of it, the variety of needs that children are going to come to you with. It's not about teaching subject matter. Mm-hmm. And I say this to every group I've ever had contact with. You're not teaching them reading, you're not teaching them math, you're not teaching them social studies. You're teaching children, period, about those things, but you're not teaching that subject matter. You're teaching human beings, young human beings in developmental stages where that's your topic more than the content. Mm-hmm. The content is easy to teach. It's teaching those children about that content that gets very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I would hope that we give all pre-teachers exposure to gifted education mm-hmm. Either in their special education class. It's typically chapter 15 or 16, and it's typically at the end, and there's almost always one snow day or one water break that gives you a missed week in that, so I think frequently it's missed. I think we need to raise that to a credible level and realize those children are always going to be in our classrooms across all socioeconomic groups and all cultural groups, and that they are no less important to us than any other child. And it's those children who can really challenge a teacher in the hardest of ways. So we do them a disservice not to have them go in looking for those children and feeling confident that they can give them the same education as they can all other children. It needs to be a pre-service core at the least, if not a course.
I knew you would close with something for gifted and talented.
They're
Thank you
very
much.
disadvantaged children.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.